I'm Matt Smith right now on Upfront. A split ticket, a state divided, a wild election night in Wisconsin. So what happened? Former Governor Scott Walker, Congresswoman Gwen Moore on their party's successes and failures. Then the Trump effect.
I think Trump's kind of a drag on our ticket.
Our new interview with former House Speaker Paul Ryan, Trump's impact on Wisconsin, and that looming 2024 announcement promised in just days. And Democrats stopping a supermajority in the state legislature. Minority Leader Greta Neubauer standing by. A special post-election edition of Upfront starts right now.
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us from our election headquarters. I'm Matt Smith. A split ticket at the top, the first time since 1998, the Russ Feingold and Tommy Thompson era. Wisconsin voters sending a mixed message on Tuesday. In the race for Senate, Senator Johnson reelected to his third term by the smallest margin of votes, some 27,000 votes. Democratic Governor Tony Evers reelected to his second term by some 3 points. So what happened? Republicans lost ground in the critical Wow counties. Let's take a look. Johnson winning some 63% in Waukesha County. Compared to 2016, he had 68%. Tim Michels underperforming even more, winning some 60% to Governor Tony Evers' 39% in Waukesha County. Compare that to 4 years ago, former Governor Scott Walker had 66%. As for Democrats, they failed to mobilize voters in Milwaukee County. Yes, Mandela Barnes won some 70% of the vote, but turnout was dramatically down. Voters simply not showing up. More on that in a minute with Congresswoman Gwen Moore in our new interview with former House Speaker Paul Ryan. But first, former Governor Scott Walker. Let's first start here in Wisconsin, the split ticket decision in the Senate and governor's race. What are your initial thoughts on what we saw?
Well, I'm obviously relieved that Ron Johnson is going to be returning to the United States Senate. I thought it'd be close all along, and that's exactly what happened. And, of course, when it comes to Tim Michels, he was outspent more than 2-1, and that's a really hard hill to climb, and he got close, but ultimately voters cast their vote one way Republican, one way Democrat.
Well, let's talk about the governor's race. Tim Michels underperformed in some key areas compared to you 4 years ago when you lost to Tony Evers. Why do you think Michels underperformed your levels?
Oh, I think in the end, it's the money. When you get outspent 2-1, the attack ads, Tonette and I got to the point where we often would just turn TV off or record it so that we could bypass all the attack ads we saw in Wisconsin. And I think there are a lot of people out there like that. He just got overwhelmed, particularly post-primary. Before the primary, Tim Michels had talked about not needing money, that he would fund it himself. After the primary, obviously the numbers are so large, needed to raise resources in addition to what he himself and his family could put in. But Tony Evers and his allies, just particularly from the West and the East Coast, had so much money that was almost impossible to overcome, and that's where you saw those margins.
In the hours following the results, there's been some criticisms from some Republicans on how the Michels campaign operated, where they campaigned, how they campaigned. Tommy Thompson told the Journal Sentinel, "I gave advice, they did not follow it." What do you make of how the campaign operated?
In the end, there's always going to be people pointing this way or that way. I think he ran a hard race. I think I saw Tim Michels all over the state, not only in southeastern Wisconsin where I live, but everywhere across the state. I think he worked incredibly hard. Would there have been things we've done differently? Yeah, but those are always easy to point out after the fact. The bottom line, though, is more than anything else. Ironically, the thing that probably helped him the most in the primary was his financial edge, was the thing that hurt him the most in the general election. And that was the fact that Evers and his allies had so much more money, it was difficult for him to counter that. And I think even in a good year overall for Republicans, that was going to be tough for Tim Michels or any other candidate.
Let's broaden out the conversation and talk about former President Donald Trump, who could on Tuesday announce a run for 2024. Trump prominent in the primary and the Michels endorsement. Did that have any impact, do you think, in the general election, given the fact he did not campaign here?
Well, I would have liked to have seen in Wisconsin and elsewhere across the country candidates that he endorsed. It would have been great if the former president's campaign team had actually invested. As I just mentioned, Michels was so outspent. It would have been great for all the money he's raising if he'd spent some of it on Michels and some of these other key races across the country. That didn't happen, or at least largely didn't happen. And I think that was a factor.
Does Trump have your support if he runs in 2024?
Well, again, if he's the nominee, he certainly does, but I'm going to wait. I think he's earned the right to be in the mix. There's a lot of other people who are good friends I mentioned who might be potential candidates. I'm not making a commitment to well into the future. What I am focused on is right now with Young America's Foundation is working with young people to get that the underlying emphasis as to why it's important to be a conservative and why we have an optimistic vision for the future.
Let me ask you about that. When we looked at Dane County, the clerk there reporting some like 80% plus turnout, new registrants, young voters. Did Republicans do a good enough job, like areas Dane County, Milwaukee County, to get out the vote, or how does that effort need to increase, or what does it look like going into 2024 here in Wisconsin?
Well, I think more than get out the vote. Again, it's the reason why I'm running a group called Young America's Foundation, because I believe it can't be just weeks before the election, that particularly with younger voters, and Dane County specifically, and Madison's a good example of that, we have to make inroads with younger voters, with young people. Right now, on campuses across the country, they're only hearing one point of view. It's a radical indoctrination point of view. We need to break through that and get to campuses, get to schools, get to younger ages, and point out the differences.
Given the closeness of the statewide races here in Wisconsin and the split ticket with Senate and governor, how pivotal is this state going to be in 2024, do you think?
I think it's the state. I think it is the state. You look at it, was the state when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. It was one of the states with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think no matter who the Republican nominee is against Joe Biden or whoever ultimately runs for the Democrats, I think this is going to be the state. It's why the RNC is having their convention in Milwaukee, and why I'm proud to be from Wisconsin, because yet again, we're going to be at the forefront, at the tip of the spear, determining the future not only of our state, but of our nation going forward.
All right, so that big drop in Milwaukee County turnout that we talked about, some 47,000 fewer votes cast than in 2018. Congresswoman Gwen Moore, an early supporter of Mandela Barnes, alongside him as he conceded in the high-profile and key U.S. Senate race. You talked about no regrets with Mandela Barnes. You endorsed him early. You supported him early. What do you make of the results?
Well, I think that the fact that he didn't win by only 27,000 votes statewide speaks volumes about the political engagement we were able to get people who are ready and prepared to move into the future. The only other option I would have had is just to be silent. And of course, that'd be out of character for me.
Did Milwaukee, City of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County voters, Democratic voters, show up like they needed to?
You know, I have not looked through the numbers. I am speculating that we could have done better. And I don't really blame the voters for this. I do think my son, Supreme Moral Mukunde, has argued and articulated often that political engagement needs to go on beyond an election, that people really have to know what's at stake. You know, when Republicans were able to very clearly articulate, you know, inflation as a big issue, people were experiencing that in their lives, but they don't exactly know what connections there are to policy. If they knew that, there's no way they would have voted for Senator Johnson. Someone who absolutely blames inflation on the rescues that we did for people who were poor, the unemployment benefits, the help with eviction, preventing people from being evicted, the bipartisan infrastructure bill he couldn't bother to vote for, the investments in climate, he claimed that was just a waste of money. And so I think to come 27,000 votes statewide is miraculous. And you know, Mandela Barnes is an African-American male, so all of the crime sort of association with the black community, we're really proud of Wisconsin not to have allowed just race to be a bottom feeder kind of issue.
What conversations are Democrats having behind the scenes, or will they have behind the scenes? Was it the right move for all the Democrats to drop out before the primary? And what was the national investment?
Well, you know, I don't think that we had some very fine candidates. I mean, I'm thinking of the top four that entered the primary. Every single one of them was a stellar candidate. Any one of them would have been better than the current Senator Ron Johnson. That being said, whoever emerged from the primary would have had the same things to overcome. If you're suggesting that there was low turnout in Milwaukee, who among the four had the potential to draw the most people out? And I think we did have a high turnout in Milwaukee. I would have been doing the very same things at the end of the campaign for any of the candidates, trying to, urge people in my district to come out and vote and to try to get those 27,000 extra votes. I think we would have had the same challenge. I think as primary polling showed that if we had a chance to snatch this seat, which was an uphill battle from the beginning, Mandela had the best chance.
Up next, the Trump announcement just hours away. Our new interview with Paul Ryan. Then Democrats blasting their national party over a key flip in Wisconsin.